3 days before my daughter's wedding, she called me and said, "Dad, for the father-daughter dance, we're going to let my stepfather do it. Everyone thinks it fits the family image better." I went completely silent. Then my ex-wife took the phone and whispered, "Just sit quietly at the back table. Don't turn the wedding into an embarrassment." But they didn't know. For 6 years I had been quietly recording everything. And that very night, I decided to reveal the truth they had been hiding for years. I am genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time here. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching, from city, country, wherever you are calling home today. That one line from you means everything to this community. Quick note, some elements of this story are fictional, built for the purpose of meaningful storytelling. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one I stand behind completely. I've been polishing the same MP badge for 40 years. Not because it needs it, because it's the one habit I never broke after I hung up the uniform, something to do with my hands when my mind needs to go quiet. That Wednesday evening I was sitting at my desk in the back room, the small one I'd turned into an office after the divorce, the one Sandra always called your cave, like it was an insult. The badge sat in my palm, square of brass that had seen more bad nights than I cared to count. Outside, the October wind was pushing leaves against the window. Inside, the room was still. I was retired. 28 years as military police, 2 combat deployments, 1 marriage that didn't survive the second one. Now I was 70 years old, living in a quiet house in Northern Virginia, and my only daughter was getting married in 3 days. I should have been happy, and I was until the phone rang. The screen said Claire. I set the badge down and answered, "Hey, kiddo." "Dad." She paused right away. Not the kind of pause where someone's choosing words. The kind where someone's already chosen them and is just getting up the nerve. I'd seen enough interrogations to know the difference. "How's everything coming along?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. "It's a lot," she said. "There's just so many moving pieces. The venue, the caterer, Raymond's family flying in from Phoenix. That sounds about right for a wedding." "Yeah." Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead." "For the father-daughter dance," she stopped. Started again. "We've decided that Raymond will be doing it with me instead. I think it makes more sense. For the family image." 4 seconds. That's how long I sat without speaking. I counted them because that's what you do when 28 years of training kicks in and overrides every other instinct you have. 4 seconds to let the words settle. 4 seconds to decide what kind of man you're going to be in the next 60. Sandra had kept my last name after the divorce, even after marrying Raymond Colt, and she knew exactly how much weight that name still carried. The man who'd been living under the same roof as my daughter for the past 8 years, ever since Claire was 26 and too old to need a stepfather, but apparently young enough to be assigned one anyway. The man Claire had been quietly, consistently steered toward calling stable, as if stability were something you earned by showing up late to someone else's story. "Dad, are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "I heard you, Claire. It's not about you. It's just Raymond's been there, for the planning, for the dress fittings, for all the stuff leading up to this. And Mom thinks—" "What do you think?" I said it quietly. Not as an accusation, as an actual question. She didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than any answer could have. "And I think it makes sense for the day to feel cohesive," she finally said. The word cohesive landed like something rehearsed, like a word someone else would use dropped into my daughter's mouth. "Whose image are we talking about, Claire, yours or Raymond's? Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is." I didn't push. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew the way you know things, after 7 decades of reading people, that this conversation wasn't the real conversation. This was the opening move, and I wasn't going to waste my response on an opening move. "Okay," I said. "Okay." She sounded surprised, maybe even a little thrown off. "Good. I heard what you said. I'll see you Saturday." After I hung up, I sat for a moment, with the phone face down on the desk and the MP badge still sitting next to it. I thought about Daniel Voss, Claire's fiancé, the man she was actually marrying. He'd called me 6 months ago out of nowhere, stumbling through the conversation like a man walking unfamiliar ground. He'd said something I hadn't forgotten. "Sir, I just want you to know I respect what you've built for Claire. Whatever happens, I want her to have both of you in her life." It was awkward and earnest and completely genuine. I liked him immediately. I wondered if Daniel knew what had just been arranged for his wedding day. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a small notebook, the kind I used to carry on duty, dark cover, narrow ruled lines, the kind of notebook that doesn't look like anything until you open it. I uncapped a pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote 2 words, Raymond Colt. Then I started writing underneath, not out of anger, out of habit. Because in 28 years of MP work, I learned one thing that never failed me. The man who keeps records doesn't need to raise his voice. He just needs to wait for the right moment. I didn't know yet exactly what that moment would look like. But I'd been a military policeman long enough to know one thing for certain. When someone telegraphs their first move, this clearly they're not done moving. And I had 3 days to figure out exactly what came next. I set the pen down, picked up the badge, started polishing again. Sleep didn't come easy that night, not because I was angry. Anger is loud, and what I felt was something quieter than that. More like the feeling you get when a mission briefing doesn't add up, when the numbers are there but the story behind them isn't. By 6 in the morning, I gave up pretending and went to the kitchen. Black coffee, no sugar. Same as every morning for the past 40 years. I stood at the counter while the pot finished brewing, watching the October light come through the window, pale and thin, the kind that doesn't warm anything. The MP badge was still on my desk where I'd left it. The notebook was open next to it. Raymond Colt's name at the top of the page, and underneath 3 lines I'd written before going to bed. I was on my second cup when my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line read, Wedding Day Timeline, Dad Please Review. I set my mug down and opened it. Claire had put it together in the kind of careful detail that told me someone else had helped her organize it. Every segment timed to the minute. The ceremony at 2 o'clock. Cocktail hour at 3:30. Dinner at 5. Toasts starting at 6:15. Raymond Colt, 10 minutes. Sandra Colt, 5 minutes. The best man. The maid of honor. I scrolled through the whole thing twice looking for my name. It wasn't there. I kept reading. At the bottom, there was a seating chart attachment. I opened it. Table 1 was the head table, Claire and Daniel Sandra, and Raymond the wedding party. Tables 2 through 8 were arranged around the dance floor. Table 9 was in the far corner, partially behind a support column, the kind of placement that said, We remembered you, without actually meaning it. My name was next to seat 3 at table 9. I picked up my phone and called Claire. She answered on the second ring. Dad, good morning. Good morning, I said. I got your email. Good. I just wanted you to have the full picture so there are no surprises. I appreciate that. I noticed I'm not listed for a toast. A pause, short but deliberate. We just thought it would be cleaner, Dad. Fewer moving parts. Cleaner, I repeated. Yeah, the program is already pretty packed, and Raymond's toast is going to be longer because he has a lot to say. About Claire, about the family. The family, I said. Which family would that be? Dad, did Raymond suggest pulling me from the program? Another pause. Longer this time. I counted it. 3 seconds. It was a group decision. That phrase, group decision, was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was the kind of answer that meant yes, but didn't want to be responsible for saying so. And table 9, I said, behind the column. You'll be comfortable there? It's quieter. Let's look, Dad. We just thought with your health situation you'd probably prefer. I stopped her right there. My what? Your mom mentioned you've been having a hard time since retirement, that you've been struggling a little. We just wanted to make sure you weren't overwhelmed. I stood very still in my kitchen. Health situation. Struggling. Those weren't Claire's words. My daughter had never once described me that way in her life. I'd run 15 miles a week until I was 68. I still did 10. I had more medical clearances than most men half my age. But someone had put that idea into her head, and I had a very clear picture of who. I'm fine, Claire, I said, keeping my voice completely level. I've never been more fine. Dad, I just... Put your mother on. 30 seconds of muffled sound. Then Sandra's voice, smooth and prepared, like she'd been waiting just off stage. Jerry, I'm glad you called. Are you... Claire is under an enormous amount of stress right now. The last thing she needs is conflict this close to the wedding. I agree completely, I said, which is why I'm asking you directly, whose idea was it to tell Claire I have a health situation? Silence. Sandra. Raymond was just concerned, she said finally. You have to understand. He sees how hard these transitions can be for men at your for men who've recently retired. He was trying to be considerate. Considerate. I almost laughed. Raymond Colt, who I had quietly bailed out of 3 separate financial disasters over 6 years, without ever once letting Claire know, was being considerate of my well-being. "I'll be at table 9, Sandra," I said. "Tell Raymond I appreciate his concern." I ended the call before she could respond. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand and the coffee going cold on the counter. Then I walked back to my desk, picked up the notebook, and added 2 more lines beneath Raymond's name. One was a date. The other was Sandra's exact phrase, written in quotation marks: health situation. In 28 years of MP work, I'd learned something that very few people outside law enforcement ever truly understand. The most dangerous thing you can do to a man who keeps records is give him new material. I turned to a fresh page and wrote a name at the top: Frank Mercer. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. Frank was an old friend from my Fort Bragg days who'd traded his uniform for a law degree about 15 years ago. Civil litigation, estate law, the kind of quiet legal work that didn't make headlines, but moved mountains when it needed to. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank Mercer speaking." "Frank, it's Jerry Harmon. I need a favor, and I need it before Saturday." A beat of silence. Then in the same unhurried voice he'd had since we were both 25 years old and pulling overnight duty in the motor pool, "Tell me everything." I sat down, opened the notebook to the first page, and started from the beginning. I talked with Frank until almost midnight. By the time I set the phone down, the notebook had 4 new pages of notes, and the coffee in my mug had gone completely cold. Frank listened the way he always had, without interrupting, without offering opinions, until he had the full picture. When I finished, he said 3 things. He said he needed 24 hours. He said to trust the process. And he said don't go to that venue without going early. So that's exactly what I did. Friday morning, I pulled into the parking lot of Whitmore Barn and Events, the venue Sandra and Raymond had chosen, a converted dairy barn, about 20 minutes outside of Fairfax, at 9 o'clock sharp. The rehearsal wasn't until 6 that evening. The lot was nearly empty. A catering truck was parked near the side entrance, and a woman in a navy blazer was standing outside the main doors with a clipboard, working through a checklist with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this several hundred times. I recognized the type immediately, the person who actually runs things while everyone else takes the credit. I walked toward her and she looked up. "Can I help you?" "My name is Gerald Harmon," I said, "father of the bride and the guarantor on this venue's contract. I wanted to come take a look at the space before this evening." Her expression shifted from polite caution to professional courtesy. She extended her hand. "Patricia Hale. I manage Whitmore. Of course, come on in." Patricia had been running this venue for 15 years. That much was clear from the way she moved through the space. Unhurried, precise, pointing out load-bearing details most people never noticed. She showed me the layout of the main hall, the placement of the tables, the position of the stage where the band would set up. I listened and I watched, and about 10 minutes in, I saw what I'd come to find. Over in the far left corner of the hall, near the column that partially blocked the sightline from the stage, a young man in his late 20s was setting up a camera on a tripod. He had 2 additional cameras in cases beside him, and a lighting meter hanging around his neck. He was testing angles with the focused attention of someone following very specific instructions. The tripod was pointed directly at table 9. I excused myself from Patricia and walked over, keeping my expression easy. "Nice setup," I said. "You the photographer?" He looked up. "Videographer, actually, Josh Merritt. I'm handling the full reception coverage." "Impressive equipment. You doing any fixed angles or all handheld?" He seemed pleased that someone was asking. People in technical trades usually are. "Mix of both. Mr. Colt actually had some specific requests about fixed coverage." He gestured toward the tripod. "He wanted a locked frame on that corner table through the whole reception. Said he wanted to make sure every reaction was captured." His words. I nodded slowly. "Every reaction, smart." "Yeah, I thought it was kind of unusual for a corner table, but—" He shrugged. "Client knows what they want." I thanked him and moved on before he could think too hard about why I'd been asking. Tommy Reeves was near the stage, running through his cue sheet with a wireless microphone in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. He was the kind of MC who wore his confidence like a second jacket, loud handshake, easy laugh, The sort of man who could make a room feel like a party in 30 seconds flat. Raymond had hired him independently, I'd learned from Claire's timeline, not through the venue, directly. That detail had sat in the back of my mind since I read it. Tommy Reeves, I said. He turned and smiled automatically. That's me. You must be family, you've got that look. Gerald Harmon, Claire's father. Something flickered behind his eyes. Brief, gone in under a second. But I'd spent 28 years reading faces, and I caught it. Great to meet you, Gerald. Big day tomorrow. It is, I said. I wanted to introduce myself, make sure we're all on the same page for the evening. Absolutely. He glanced at his cue sheet, then back at me. Actually, I did want to. There's a note here about the program flow. If at any point during the reception you wanted to come up and say a few words, I've been asked to, he paused, choosing his words, to redirect to the next segment. Keep things moving. Mr. Colt mentioned it was about pacing. About pacing, I repeated. Right, just so there are no awkward gaps. I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, but looks like it does. I appreciate you telling me, Tommy. Good to know exactly how the evening is structured. He nodded, visibly relieved that I hadn't pushed back. I let him think that was because I'd accepted it. I walked back through the main hall, slowly noting the sightlines. The exit points the distance between Table 9 and the stage. 50, maybe 55 feet. Far enough to be forgotten. Close enough to see everything clearly. Patricia was waiting near the entrance, still working through her clipboard. Everything look all right, Mr. Harmon. It's a beautiful space, I said. And I meant it. Ms. Hale, one quick question. As the guarantor on this contract, I assume you have my contact information on file. Of course. Standard procedure. Good. I may need to reach you tomorrow about a specific clause in the agreement. Nothing urgent, but I want to make sure we have a clear line of communication. She looked at me with the measured attention of someone who had learned to read between the lines professionally. My direct number is on the contract. Feel free to call any time. I shook her hand, thanked her, and walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, without starting the engine. The picture was getting clearer. Josh had a locked camera on Table 9, pointed at the spot where I'd be sitting, waiting for the moment I reacted to watching Raymond take my place on the dance floor. Tommy had been instructed to cut my access to the microphone the moment I moved toward it. Both of them thought they were following logistical instructions. Neither of them had any idea what those instructions were actually for. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank. Pulled the original guarantee contract. There's a clause we added, Jerry. Call me when you're alone. I read it twice. A clause we added. I remembered the afternoon we'd signed the venue agreement. Frank had sat beside me at his office table, pen in hand, and said something I hadn't thought much about since. Just in case, Jerry. Just in case. At the time I thought he was being overly careful. Now I was starting to think he'd been exactly careful enough. I put the truck in reverse and headed for the exit. There were still 9 hours before the rehearsal dinner, and I had a call to make. I didn't make the call from the venue parking lot. Old habit, never conduct sensitive business where you can be observed. I drove about 3 miles down Route 29 and pulled into a gas station that had a diner attached to it, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that came in a pot that never quite emptied. I took a corner booth, ordered black coffee, and called Frank. He picked up before the second ring. I was waiting, he said. Tell me about the clause. I heard him open a folder on his end. Frank Mercer was one of those lawyers who still kept physical files on everything. Said he didn't trust a hard drive to show up in court the way a piece of paper did. When you signed the venue guarantee agreement last October, he said you were putting up $15,000 as a financial surety for the event costs. Standard for a venue of that size when the primary contract holder has limited credit history. Raymond's name wasn't on the primary contract. Sandra's was. And Sandra's credit history had some gaps in it that I knew about and had never mentioned to anyone. I remember signing, I said. You were sitting across from me. Right. And I added a rider to that agreement. A guarantor authorization rider. It specifies that because you are the financial guarantor of record, the venue cannot permit any legal, financial, or contractual activity to take place on the property without your written consent. That includes any room or space on the premises, main hall, bridal suite, private offices, all of it. I set my coffee mug down. Raymond doesn't know that clause exists. Raymond never asked to see the full guarantee agreement, Frank said. He only saw the primary contract Sandra signed. The rider is attached to your copy and the venue's copy. Patricia Hale has it on file, and it's enforceable. Completely. You added it as guarantor. Patricia's predecessor signed off on it. It's been in their records for 12 months. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the diner window, a truck pulled in, and a man in a work jacket climbed out and headed inside, nodding at the waitress by name. Normal Friday afternoon in Northern Virginia. Nothing about it looked like the kind of day where 6 years of careful record-keeping were about to matter. You said you found something else, I said. The financial records. 3 of them. Frank's voice shifted, still measured, but with an edge underneath it. First one goes back to 2019. A wire transfer of $40,000 from a personal account in your name into a joint savings account registered to Sandra and Raymond Colt. The memo line says family loan. Do you remember what that was for? I remembered exactly what it was for. Raymond had made a private investment in a commercial real estate venture outside of Richmond, a small strip mall development that collapsed inside of 8 months. The developer folded, the investors got nothing, and Raymond was suddenly $40,000 short with a mortgage payment coming up and a woman he was trying to impress. I'd found out through Sandra, who called me in tears one Sunday morning, not asking for help directly, but describing the situation in enough detail that the ask was obvious. I'd moved the money within 48 hours. I told Sandra it was a loan. I told myself it was for Claire because if Raymond's financial collapse became visible, Claire would have felt the fallout. I never told Claire. Not once. I thought protecting her peace mattered more than getting credit for saving it. I remember, I said, second transaction 2021. You retained me for a consultation on a contract dispute involving a limited liability company connected to Raymond Colt. 3 sessions, 2 letters drafted, dispute resolved quietly. He never knew you were involved. That one had been a supplier agreement Raymond signed without reading the termination clause properly. The supplier had threatened to sue. I'd called Frank. Frank had written 2 very precise letters, and the supplier had backed down. Raymond told Sandra he'd handled it himself. And the third, I said, $22,000, October 2023, routed through a third-party account. The recipient was a private creditor. Frank paused. Jerry, that one has a promissory note attached to it, meaning the creditor could have pursued legal action if the debt wasn't cleared. $22,000 to keep a man I didn't particularly respect out of a situation that would have devastated my daughter's sense of stability. I'd done it without hesitation. I'd done it without telling a single person. You kept records of all 3, Frank said. It wasn't a question. Every transfer, every date, every amount. It's in the notebook. Then here's what you need to understand. His voice went very level. In 6 years, you have quietly cleared over $60,000 in financial damage caused by Raymond Colt. And tomorrow he is planning to stand on a dance floor in front of 150 people as the man who built your daughter's stable life. A beat of silence. And then after the reception, he wants her to sign a co-management authorization that would give him legal access to the trust fund you spent 15 years building for her. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and fried food and ordinary life. I looked at my hands on the table. 70 years old, calloused from 2 decades of field work, from building a back deck by myself the summer after the divorce, from gripping a steering wheel through 2 deployments and 1,000 overnight shifts. These hands had signed every one of those transfers, and not one of them had ever been thanked for it. Frank, I said, do we have everything we need? Almost. I need one more thing confirmed before tomorrow. Walter Briggs, the trust administrator, needs to be on standby. If Raymond presents any authorization document at that venue, Walter has to be there in person to declare it void. Walter Briggs had administered the Harmon Family Trust since I established it in 2010. Under the trust terms, any change to financial control authorization required 2 things: my notarized written consent and Walter's in-person verification. Without both, no document was worth the paper it was printed on. I'd set it up that way deliberately back when Claire was 22, and I was still worried about the kinds of men she might one day bring home. Turns out I'd been right to worry. I'll call Walter this afternoon, I said. Good. Frank closed his folder. Jerry, one more thing. Tomorrow, no matter what happens, you do not raise your voice. You do not make a scene. You let the paper do the talking. Frank, I said. When have I ever needed to raise my voice? He almost laughed. Get some rest. I'll see you at the venue. I left a $10 bill on the table, picked up my jacket, and walked back to my truck. The rehearsal dinner was in 4 hours. Raymond Colt would be there, smiling his expensive smile, playing the role he'd been rehearsing for 8 years. And I would sit across the table from him and say very little. Because the most dangerous thing in any room is the man who already knows how the evening ends. The restaurant Sandra had chosen for the rehearsal dinner was called Hargrove's, a mid-range Italian place in Fairfax, with exposed brick walls and lighting dim enough to make everyone look better than they felt. About 30 people were already seated when I arrived. I recognized some of them. Claire's college friends near the back, Daniel's parents at a center table looking comfortable and genuinely happy in the way that people do when they haven't spent the last 3 days managing a situation. I handed my jacket to the coat check and stood in the entrance for a moment, the way I always did in any new room, taking stock, noting positions, reading the arrangement of people the way you read a map. That's when I saw Raymond Colt. He was standing near the bar with a drink in one hand talking to 2 men I didn't recognize. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things do when someone else pays attention to the details. His laugh carried across the room, the big, generous kind that fills space and signals confidence. He looked exactly like what he wanted everyone to think he was. I had known this man for 8 years. I had written him 3 checks he didn't deserve, and never once asked for acknowledgement. And standing there in the entrance of Hargrove's, watching him work the room like it belonged to him, I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and far more useful than anger. He spotted me before I could move. His face opened into a wide smile, and he crossed the room with his hand already extended. Jerry, you made it. I shook his hand, firm, even. Raymond, good to see you. He clapped my shoulder once the way men do when they want physical contact to read as warmth. Claire's been a little stressed, as I'm sure you know, but tonight's going to be good. Relaxed, just family. That's what tonight should be, I said. Absolutely. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to create the impression of confidence. And tomorrow's going to be beautiful. I want you to know. Jerry, we're all really glad you're part of this. The family unit, you know. Family unit. There it was. 2 words doing the work of a much longer sentence. The kind of phrase that sounds inclusive and means the opposite. I appreciate that Raymond, I said, and let him read into it whatever he needed to. He moved back toward the bar, and I moved toward the tables. Daniel Voss found me before I found him. He came around from the far side of the room, straightening his jacket, looking like a man who'd been watching the door. He extended his hand with the same directness he'd had on the phone 6 months ago. Gerald, really glad you're here. Wouldn't have missed it, I said. We stood together for a moment without saying anything. Daniel was watching Raymond across the room, not with hostility, more like the focused attention of someone trying to solve a problem he hadn't been given all the pieces to. His jaw was set in a way that told me he was carrying something he hadn't found the right moment to put down. I liked this young man. I had from the first phone call. Sandra appeared at my elbow before I could say anything else to Daniel. She was wearing a deep blue dress, and the expression she used for situations that required maximum composure. She kissed my cheek, the kind of greeting that performs warmth without delivering it. Jerry, you look well. Sandra, I gestured toward Daniel. Your son-in-law is good company. Daniel excused himself with a polite nod, and Sandra watched him go, then turned back to me. We sat down together at a side table, while the room filled in around us. The conversation was careful and surface level for about 10 minutes. The venue, the weather forecast for tomorrow, whether the catering would arrive on schedule. Then between the bread course and the salad, she set her wine glass down and said it. Oh, Jerry Raymond wanted me to mention. After the reception tomorrow, we were thinking the immediate family could gather in the bridal suite for a little while, just to decompress, be together. And he thought it might be a good time to handle some estate coordination paperwork while everyone's in one place. I looked at her. Oh, what kind of paperwork? Just housekeeping, really. Now that Claire and Daniel are married, Raymond wants to make sure everything is properly documented on the family side. Beneficiary confirmations, that sort of thing. It would take 20 minutes. Beneficiary confirmations. The phrase was carefully chosen, vague enough to sound administrative, specific enough to point in exactly one direction. I'll think about it, I said. Sandra smiled satisfied and reached for her wine. She delivered the message. In her mind, the conversation was complete. I watched her hands around the stem of the glass and thought about how long it must have taken Raymond to rehearse that particular script with her. How many times they'd practiced it until it sounded like her idea. Across the table, a woman I hadn't spoken to yet was watching me. She was in her mid-60s, silver hair pulled back, wearing a burgundy cardigan over a collared shirt. She'd been seated 2 chairs down from me since the beginning of dinner, and had said almost nothing to anyone for the past 40 minutes. Sandra's older sister, Beverly Grant. I'd met her 4 or 5 times over the years at family occasions, always positioned firmly in Sandra's orbit, always reliable in the way that people are when they've chosen a side and stuck to it. Tonight she wasn't looking at Sandra. She was looking at me. Twice during the meal she opened her mouth like she was about to say something, then closed it again. The third time she reached for her water glass instead and stared at the table. Whatever she was carrying it was heavier than she was used to. The dinner wound down around 9:30. People began gathering jackets and saying their goodbyes in the slow, unhurried way of a group that knows it will see each other again tomorrow. I shook hands with Daniel's father, who had a carpenter's grip and an honest face. I said goodnight to Claire, who hugged me quickly and said she'd see me at the ceremony. Her arms felt tighter than usual, like she was holding something in. I collected my jacket from the coat check and stepped outside into the October air. The parking lot was lit by a row of overhead lamps that turned everything a pale yellow. I was 2 rows from my truck when I heard footsteps behind me, quick and deliberate. Jerry. I turned. Beverly Grant was standing 10 feet away, her cardigan pulled tight across her chest, her eyes moving once to the restaurant entrance behind her, before settling back on me. She looked like a woman who had just made a decision she couldn't unmake. I need to talk to you, she said low and fast. Not here, not tonight, tomorrow morning, early before anyone else is moving. I looked at her for a moment. 8 years of Sandra's corner, 8 years of family dinners and holiday tables, where Beverly had been reliably, consistently, entirely on her sister's side. And tonight she was standing in a parking lot, asking to meet me in secret. I said. She named a coffee shop on Route 7, about 10 minutes from the venue. 7 o'clock, she said. Please. She didn't wait for my answer. She turned and walked back toward the restaurant entrance, her heels clicking fast across the asphalt. I stood in the cold air and watched her go. In 28 years of MP work, I had interviewed hundreds of people on the edge of telling me something important. Beverly Grant had every sign the avoidance all evening, the aborted sentences, the way she'd looked at Sandra's hands around that wine glass, like she was watching someone hold something she wished they'd put down. Whatever she knew, it was enough to break 8 years of loyalty in one Friday night. I got in my truck and drove home. Sleep this time came a little easier, because tomorrow was already taking shape, and the shape of it was starting to look exactly like what I needed it to be. I talked with Frank until almost midnight. Not because there was that much left to say. By 11, we had covered the rider, clause, the trust structure, Walter's contact information, and the sequence of events Frank wanted documented before Saturday. We talked past midnight because neither of us was ready to stop the way men who have known each other for 30 years sometimes stay on the line, not for the information, but for the company. At 11:58, Frank said, "Get some sleep, Jerry." I said I would. We both knew I wouldn't. I was on the road by 6:40. The October dark was still thick when I pulled out of my driveway, the kind of darkness that exists in the hour before dawn when the sky has lightened just enough to show you the shapes of things, without revealing their colors. I drove Route 7 with the heat on low and the radio off. I had learned in the military that the hour before a significant event is not for music or distraction. It is for thinking through what you know, what you don't know, and what you are prepared to do with either. What I knew, Raymond Colt had a document ready. Sandra had arranged the venue contact. The camera at Whitmore Barn had been positioned to catch me at my worst. And somewhere in the distance between those facts was a plan that had been running longer than a week, longer perhaps than I had allowed myself to believe. What I didn't know, how far back it went, and who else was carrying it. Millie's was a narrow place set back slightly from Route 7, the kind of coffee shop that exists in the space between a gas station and a dry cleaner, and somehow outlasts both. It had been there since at least the 90s, I knew, because Sandra and I had stopped there once the winter. Claire was 7 on the way back from a hardware run. Claire had ordered hot chocolate and held the mug with both hands and said it tasted like being inside. I had not thought about that morning in years. I thought about it now pulling into the parking lot at 6:52, because the mind does what it wants in the hour before something changes. I went in and ordered black coffee and took the corner table that faced the door. The shop was nearly empty. A man in a utility jacket at the counter. A woman with a laptop near the window. The kind of Saturday morning quiet that belongs to people who are up early by necessity rather than choice. The coffee came in a thick ceramic mug. I wrapped both hands around it and waited. Beverly Grant arrived at 7:03. She came through the door with the careful movement of a woman who has made a decision she is not entirely certain about and is committed to it anyway. She was wearing the same burgundy cardigan I had seen at the rehearsal dinner over a white blouse, a canvas tote bag on one shoulder. Her silver hair was pulled back. She looked like a woman in her mid-60s who had slept badly and had dressed anyway, which told me she had been awake longer than the drive over. She spotted me immediately. She did not wave. She came directly to the table, set her bag on the chair beside her, and sat down without taking off her coat. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You asked?" I said. "I came." She looked at the table for a moment. A waitress appeared, and Beverly ordered tea without looking at the menu, the way people order when they are not thinking about the order. When the waitress left, Beverly folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the expression of someone who has rehearsed an opening line and has now decided to abandon it. "I need to tell you something about Sandra," she said, "and about Raymond, and I need you to understand that I am telling you this because I could not live with not telling you. Not because I want to cause trouble for my sister." "I understand," I said. "She won't see it that way if she ever finds out I was here. She won't hear it from me." Beverly nodded once. Then she reached into her canvas tote and removed her phone. She held it for a moment before she set it on the table between us screen up. "2 weeks ago, I was at Sandra's house for dinner. We were in the kitchen after Sandra was on the phone in the other room. I went to the living room to get my reading glasses and her laptop was open on the coffee table." She paused. Outside, a truck moved slowly past the window on Route 7. "I wasn't looking for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that." Her email was open. There was a message at the top of the screen from Raymond. The subject line was "Wednesday Final Review." I saw the first few lines before I understood what I was reading. She picked up the phone and turned it toward me. I took a photograph of the screen. I don't know why exactly. Instinct, I suppose. The kind of instinct you develop when you have watched someone operate the way Sandra operates for 60 years. I looked at the photograph on her phone. It was an email thread, 2 messages. The most recent was from Raymond, timestamped October 1st, 2025 at 9:14 p.m. I read it slowly. "Sandra, everything is in place for the 11th. Connor will have the document in the suite by 4. The consent clause is the only barrier. Once we have Jerry in the suite with the document in front of him, and family around him, the social pressure alone should be sufficient. If he hesitates, remind him it is for Claire's protection, his age, his isolation since retirement, the trust being unmanaged. Walter does not need to be present for the initial signing. We can manage the verification separately. The important thing is to get his signature on paper before he has time to think about it or make calls. Once we handle Jerry, the rest is straightforward." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on the table and looked at the coffee mug in front of me. Once we handle Jerry. I had been handled before. Twice in Kandahar, once outside Fallujah, and once in a parking garage in Norfolk, by a man who had believed that a 62-year-old MP would not react quickly. He had been wrong about that. Raymond Colt was wrong about this. "There's a second message," Beverly said quietly. "Below that one. From Sandra." I picked up the phone again. Sandra's reply was 4 lines. "Confirmed. I'll make sure he's positioned near the suite after the reception. Beverly might be a problem. Keep her occupied during the toast. I still have the 2019 file if we need it." I set the phone down a second time. I still have the 2019 file. I did not say anything for a moment. Through the window, the Route 7 traffic had begun to pick up the slow accumulation of a Saturday morning, finding its pace. The man in the utility jacket had left. The woman with the laptop was packing up. Did Sandra know you saw it? I said. No. She came back into the living room 2 minutes later, and I was sitting with my glasses on, reading a magazine. Beverly's tea had arrived at some point without either of us noticing. She wrapped both hands around the cup the way Claire had wrapped her hands around hot chocolate 23 years ago in this same town, and I pushed that thought away because it did not belong in this conversation. I went home that night and I sat with it for 2 weeks. I called Sandra twice. Not about the email, just to see if she would tell me anything. She didn't. You tried to warn her, I said. In March, Beverly said, before any of this was in motion or before I knew it was. I told her that whatever she was planning with Raymond regarding your finances was going to end badly, that she was underestimating you. A short pause. She told me I was being dramatic. She told me the same thing about a contractor once. I said, the contractor was right. Something moved across Beverly's face that was not quite a smile. She picked up her tea. What are you going to do with this? I'm going to make a phone call, I said, and then I'm going to make sure that whatever happens today happens on the right terms. I asked her if she would be willing to put her account in writing what she saw when she saw it. What Sandra's reply said. She said yes without hesitating, which told me she had already decided that before she walked through the door. I told her to keep the photograph on her phone and not to delete the original. She said she understood. I left money on the table and stepped outside at 7:31. The October morning had come up while we were inside the sky, now the particular pale blue that comes after the dark burns off the trees along Route 7, catching the early light in amber and rust. A Saturday, my daughter's wedding day. 7 hours and 29 minutes until a ceremony that someone had spent months turning into a mechanism. I called Frank from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring. I have the email, I said. Raymond's words, Sandra's reply. Photographed from the original. A silence on the line. 3 seconds, which for Frank was a long time to be quiet. Where are you? He said. Millie's Route 7. Be at the Marriott off Route 50 by 9, he said. Bring everything. I'm calling Walter now. I looked at the phone after the call ended. 7:33 a.m. 87 minutes to the Marriott. Enough time to go home, change, and drive there with 7 minutes to spare. I stood in the parking lot of a coffee shop on Route 7 on a Saturday morning in October, with a photograph of a man's words on a borrowed phone, and the particular calm that comes not from the absence of danger, but from the understanding that you have been preparing for this specific moment without knowing its name. The most dangerous thing Raymond Colt had ever written was not the co-management authorization document. It was 4 words in a casual email to a woman who had kept everything. Once we handled Jerry, he was about to find out what 6 years of patience actually looked like. The Marriott off Route 50 sat between a gas station and a row of chain restaurants, the kind of place nobody notices, which was exactly why Frank had chosen it. I pulled into the parking lot at 8:52 a.m. The sky was the flat gray of mid-October mornings in Virginia, low clouds pressing down like a hand on a shoulder. Inside, Frank Mercer was already at a corner table near the window, a yellow legal pad open in front of him, a cup of coffee going cold beside it. Across from him sat a man I had not seen in almost 2 years. Walter Briggs looked the same as always, pressed khakis, a navy blazer, wire-rimmed glasses perched at the end of a broad nose. He was 63 and carried himself the way career fiduciaries often do, unhurried, watchful, with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 30 years making sure other people's money stays where it belongs. He had been the independent trustee of the Harmon Family Trust since 2010. In that time, he had never once called me with a problem, until last night. Jerry, he stood, extended a hand. His grip was firm, brief. Walter, I sat down. You drove from Richmond this morning. Left at 6. He settled back into his chair and folded his hands on the table. Frank told me enough. I wanted to see the document itself. Frank slid a manila envelope across the table. Patricia Hale scanned this at 7:45 this morning. Found it in the venue manager's inbox, submitted Thursday evening through the venue's general contact form, along with a request to have it notarized on-site during the reception. I opened the envelope. The document inside was 4 pages clean. Margins professional formatting. At the top, in standard legal typeface, it read, Harmon Family Trust, Co-Management, Authorization, and Asset Oversight Agreement. Beneath that 2 lines down was a name I had not authorized anyone to put on anything. Raymond Colt. The document outlined a co-management authorization under which Raymond described as a family stakeholder with vested interest in trust beneficiary welfare would be granted joint operational oversight of trust distributions. It cited Claire's well-being as the principal justification and referenced my age and recent indicators of reduced executive capacity as supporting grounds for the transfer of shared authority. I set the papers down flat on the table. He called me unstable, I said. He called you declining, Frank said. Legally, there's a difference. The document uses the phrase diminished oversight capacity. It doesn't allege incompetence outright, but it implies reduced function. It's designed to look like a protective measure. Walter picked up the document and turned to page 3. He pointed at the signature block at the bottom. This is the part that matters. There were 2 signature lines, one for Walter as trustee, one for me as settler. My line was not blank. Someone had printed my full legal name, Gerald Allen Harmon, in the signature field. Not a signature, a printed name, but beneath it, faint and slightly misaligned, was what appeared to be an image of my signature. Not handwritten, reproduced. That's a scan, Walter said, or a high-resolution copy. I've seen this before pulled from a prior document, overlaid into a new one. It's not your live signature, Jerry, but if you're standing across a room and someone glances at it, it reads as one. Frank leaned forward. Raymond planned to present this in the bridal suite tonight with you present. The story would be that you agreed to the arrangement beforehand, that the signature had already been obtained, and that Walter simply needed to initial as witness. He was going to forge my consent, I said, not a question. He was going to manufacture the appearance of it, Frank said. That could fall under criminal forgery and attempted fraud. If he submitted this to Walter as a completed document, that's not a civil matter anymore. Walter set the pages down. I can freeze the trust this morning. As independent trustee, I have fiduciary authority to halt all distributions and place the trust under administrative hold if I have reasonable cause to believe a fraudulent transfer or unauthorized modification is being attempted. The email Beverly provided, combined with this document, constitutes reasonable cause. Do it, I said. Walter pulled out his own folder, removed a single form, and uncapped a pen. I'll need your verbal confirmation on record that you did not sign this document and did not authorize anyone to reproduce your signature. I did not sign that document. I did not authorize anyone to use my signature in any form. He wrote it down, dated it, signed it himself. I'll file the administrative hold notice with the trust account by 10 o'clock. Raymond Colt will have no access to information, no standing to present documents, and no legal pathway into this trust until a Virginia court says otherwise. I watched him sign. 30 years of fiduciary steadiness reduced to a single pen stroke. It was in its own way the most powerful thing I had seen all week. Frank gathered the documents into a neat stack. We now have the email, the venue scan, Patricia's timestamp, Beverly's statement, and Walter's administrative record. That's 4 independent sources. 5, I said. I reached into my jacket and set my notebook on the table. Every entry, dated every conversation, logged in my own hand. I've been keeping records since Wednesday. Frank looked at the notebook. He almost smiled. Of course you have. Outside the parking lot was filling up. It was 9:41. The wedding was in 4 hours and 16 minutes. Walter closed his briefcase and stood. I'll be at the venue by 1, not as a guest. He paused. As the trustee of record. I watched him walk toward the door, a quiet man carrying a document that would end something Raymond had been building for years. What I did not yet know, what Frank had not told me, and what Walter had only hinted at when he said I've seen this before, was that the reproduced signature had not come from a recent document. It had come from something signed in 2019, and the person who had access to that original was not Raymond. Frank followed me out of the Marriott in his own car. We had agreed on that before we left the meeting room. 2 vehicles, same destination, no conversation that could be overheard through an open window at a red light. 30 years of civil litigation had made Frank careful about the details that other people forgot to be careful about. Walter had left 10 minutes ahead of us, heading back toward Richmond with his briefcase and a trust freeze notice that was already filed and already final. I drove the 3 miles to Whitmore Barn with the folder on the passenger seat and the morning sun coming in low and flat from the east, the way October sun does when it has not yet earned its height. I thought about Sandra the entire drive, not about what she had done. I had been thinking about that since 7:33 that morning in the parking lot of Millie's. I thought about what I had missed. 30 years of knowing a person, 11 years of being married to one, and I had filed her under soft power and narrative management and told myself that was the full picture. Raymond was the visible threat, the charming one, the one with his hand on Claire's shoulder and his name in the toast list. I had been watching Raymond the way you watch the man standing in the middle of the room, and Sandra had been the one standing in the doorway deciding who came in. The parking lot at Whitmore Barn was half full when I arrived. Florists were unloading white dahlias from a van near the east entrance. A catering truck sat with its engine running by the loading dock. 2 women in staff jackets were carrying folding chairs from a storage area toward the main barn. The hand-lettered sign above the entrance read, Voss Harmon, Wedding Saturday, October 11th. My daughter's name beside mine on a building where I had been assigned to sit behind a column and watched from a locked camera angle. I parked and waited for Frank. He pulled in beside me at 10:17. Patricia Hale met us at the side entrance. She had texted me about a narrow door set into the north wall of the barn, away from the florist traffic and the catering logistics. She was wearing a Whitmore Barn staff jacket over a gray blouse, her dark hair pulled back, a clipboard under one arm, and a sealed envelope in her hand. She was the kind of woman who ran a difficult operation with precision, and without announcing that she was doing so, which I had noticed on Friday and was now grateful for. Mr. Harmon, she shook my hand, then Frank's. Mr. Mercer, come inside. She led us through a narrow service hallway that ran behind the main reception hall. Through the interior wall, I could hear someone testing a sound system, a low thud of bass, then silence, then the same thud again. We passed the catering prep area, a linen storage room, and a small office with a frosted glass panel on the door. Patricia opened it and let us in. The door closed behind us. The office was small and functional. A desk, 3 chairs, a filing cabinet, a wall calendar with the October dates blocked out in venue shorthand. Patricia set the sealed envelope on the desk and opened her clipboard. The document you asked me to scan this morning, she said. I retained the original in our secure files. It came through our general inquiry form on Thursday at 9:42 p.m. She turned the clipboard toward us. The submission included a contact name, a phone number, and a specific request. I want you to read it exactly as it was submitted. I looked at the form. The contact name was Sandra Harmon. I read it twice. Not because I had not understood it the first time, because there is a difference between suspecting something and seeing it written in a form field on an official venue document at 10:22 in the morning, and that difference takes a moment to cross. Sandra had not used Colt. She had used my last name, the name she had kept after the divorce, the name that still appeared on her bank accounts and her driver's license, and apparently on a Thursday night inquiry form to a wedding venue in Fairfax County. My name used as a door she had no right to walk through. She contacted you directly, I said. Not Raymond Colt. Directly and personally, Patricia said. The phone number on the submission is registered to a Sandra Harmon at a residential address in Fairfax. I verified it this morning after you called. She paused, and I noticed that she paused the way people pause when they want to be precise about what comes next. Mr. Harmon, I want to be transparent with you about something. When this request came in Thursday night, I flagged it in our internal system before I did anything else. We are a wedding venue. We coordinate flowers and seating arrangements and catering timelines. A request to arrange an on-site notarization for estate paperwork during a reception is not something that falls within the scope of what we do, and it is not something I would approve without understanding why it was being asked. Did you respond to her? Frank said. I sent an automated acknowledgement. Nothing confirmatory. I wanted to understand the full picture before I took any action. She looked at me. Then you called Friday morning about the guarantor authorization rider, and the picture became considerably clearer. Frank nodded. He reached into his folder and set a document on the desk, a copy of the rider clause. 2 pages, both signatures dated August. The rider prohibits any legal or financial transaction from being conducted on venue premises without Mr. Harmon's written consent. It was attached to the original venue guarantee at the time of signing and is binding on all parties operating within this venue on the date of the event. I have both copies, Patricia said. She produced them from her clipboard, Whitmore Barnes' copy and the original. Both signed, both dated the rider clause clearly visible on the second page of each. Whatever they were planning to do in that bridal suite this evening, this venue is not going to facilitate it. If any attempt is made to conduct unauthorized legal activity on these premises, I will document it, involve our venue security team, and provide a full written statement for any legal proceeding that follows. We will need that statement, Frank said. Can you have it ready before the ceremony? By noon, she said. She left to attend to the florist. Frank stayed at the desk and began writing on his legal pad, the careful, deliberate handwriting of a man who has learned that the words you put down before the argument begins are the ones that matter most. I walked to the small window in the corner of the office. Outside, one of the florists was carrying an armful of white dahlias toward the main entrance. Another was arranging greenery along the ceremony aisle inside the barn, visible through the main doors. The Edison bulbs were not yet lit. They hung dark above the rows of white chairs, waiting for the afternoon when someone would flip a switch and the whole room would go amber and warm and look exactly the way it was supposed to look. I thought about the loan agreement. October 2019. We had signed it at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one Claire had eaten breakfast at every morning for 12 years. The lawyer had prepared 2 copies. Sandra had sat beside me, not across from me, the way she always positioned herself when she wanted to appear aligned, rather than opposite. We had signed in sequence, me first, then her. She had folded her copy along the crease, slid it into her bag. A black leather bag. I remembered it specifically because it was new, and she had mentioned it twice that week, and the conversation had moved on within 30 seconds. I had not thought about that copy in 6 years. She had kept it. Not in a drawer somewhere, not in a box in a closet. She had kept it the way a person keeps something they believe they will need. Specifically, intentionally, with a purpose that had taken 6 years to arrive at. I turned away from the window. Frank, I said. He looked up from the legal pad. Someone tried to have a conversation with Sandra about this before the wedding, I said. About the trust. About Raymond's intentions. You mentioned it this morning. You said there was someone who had tried and been dismissed. Frank set down his pen. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific question and has the answer ready. I did say that, he said. Who was it? He held my gaze for a moment. Then he said, that conversation is for after the ceremony. There are things that need to happen in the right order today, Jerry. This is not the first one. He picked up his pen and went back to writing. I looked at the notebook in my jacket pocket. I had 3 hours and 40 minutes before the ceremony began, a venue manager preparing a written statement, a trust already frozen, and a folder full of documentation sitting on a desk in a room that smelled of cut flowers and catering prep. And somewhere in this building, Sandra Harmon was getting dressed for her daughter's wedding, carrying 6 years of patience and a copy of a document she believed was the most powerful thing in the room. She did not know yet that the most powerful thing in the room was the pen Frank Mercer was still moving across his legal pad. Frank stepped outside to make a call. Patricia returned to the main hall to supervise the florists. That left me alone in the administrative office with a sealed envelope, a notebook, and 11 minutes of quiet that I did not particularly want. I used them to think about Daniel Voss. I had met him 4 times before today. The first was at a dinner in March of last year when Claire had introduced him across a restaurant table as though she were presenting evidence. Look, here is a man who is steady and calm and does not make things complicated. He had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye and said, She talks about you a lot, sir. I had not known what to do with that, so I had nodded and picked up the menu. The second and third times were brief, a holiday gathering, a birthday dinner, both at Sandra's house events, where I was present by obligation, and where Raymond Colt occupied the space near the drinks table and told stories that required everyone's attention. Daniel had sat across the room, both times watching. Not the way a man watches when he is bored, the way a man watches when he is keeping score. The 4th time was a phone call. February of this year, a Tuesday evening, the kind of call where the other person waits a beat too long before speaking. Daniel had said he wanted to ask me something about the trust, not to access it, just to understand how it worked, who managed it, what would happen to it if something changed. I had told him it was administered independently, that Walter Briggs had been the trustee for 15 years, and that nothing in it could change without my written consent and Walter's in-person verification. Daniel had said, "Good, that's good to know." Then he had thanked me and ended the call. I had written it down. February 11th, 2025. Daniel called, asked about trust structure, seemed relieved by the answer. Now I understood why. He found me in the hallway outside Patricia's office at 11:03. He was in his dress shirt and slacks, his jacket not yet on his tie, loose at the collar. He looked like a man who had not slept well and had made peace with that fact. "I figured you'd be here early," he said. "I figured you'd find me." He glanced down the hallway in both directions. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" "Not in the main hall." I led him back into the office. He closed the door himself. For a moment he just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. Then he looked up. "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me the truth," I said. "The explanation can follow." He nodded once. 8 months ago, February maybe the 9th or 10th, I was at Sandra's house for dinner. Claire was helping in the kitchen. I was in the living room, and Sandra had left her phone on the coffee table. It buzzed. I wasn't trying to read it, but the preview was long enough. He paused. It was from Raymond. It said, "The consent clause is the only problem. Once we handle Jerry, the rest is straightforward." I kept my voice level. "And you didn't tell me." I tried to tell Sandra. He sat down across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. That same night, after dinner, I pulled her aside and told her I'd seen the message. She told me I'd misread it, that Raymond was talking about a business arrangement that had nothing to do with the family. She was so calm about it that I second-guessed myself for about a week. And Claire, he was quiet for a moment. Claire had already started talking about the dance by then, the father-daughter dance. She brought it up in January, said she thought it would be meaningful to include Raymond, that he'd been such a steady presence during the hard years. He stopped. I didn't realize until later that Sandra had been laying that groundwork for months. Little comments. "Raymond has really stepped up. It would mean so much to him. Your father would understand. He's practical about these things." I sat with that for a moment. My daughter had not invented the idea. The idea had been planted, watered, and grown in carefully arranged light, and by the time Claire believed it was her own thought, the roots were already too deep to see. "You have the text?" I asked. "A screenshot." He reached into his shirt pocket and set his phone on the desk screen. "Up." I looked at it, the timestamp, the preview. Text the name at the top of the thread. February 9th, 2025. Raymond, Colt. The consent clause is the only problem. Once we handle Jerry, the rest is straightforward. "I need a copy of that," I said. "Already sent it to your number. This morning, 6:45 a.m. I had not checked my phone since the Marriott. I reached into my jacket and looked. There it was, a message from a number I did not recognize. A screenshot, no caption. "You sent this before you knew we'd talk today," I said. "I sent it because I knew you'd be here." He met my eyes. "And because I should have sent it 8 months ago." There was no use in telling him he was right. He already knew. "Does Claire know any of this?" I asked. "No." He said it without hesitation. "And I don't think she should hear it from me. Not today." He stood, straightened his shirt. "But I think she needs to hear it from someone." He left the way he came. I sat alone with his phone number in my call log and a screenshot in my messages, and the particular weight of learning that someone had done the right thing just 6 months too late. Through the wall I could hear chairs being arranged. The ceremony was 2 hours and 54 minutes away, and somewhere in this building Sandra Harmon was getting dressed for her daughter's wedding, carrying 6 years of patience, and a copy of a document she believed no one else had thought to check. She did not yet know that the one person she had never accounted for had just walked into this office and handed me the last piece. Frank was on the phone when I walked back into the hallway. He held up one finger, "Give me a minute," and turned toward the window. I stood by the door and waited, watching the florists arrange white dahlias along the ceremony aisle through the glass panel beside the entrance. Someone had strung Edison bulbs above the rows of white chairs. The barn looked the way it was supposed to look, carefully assembled, built for a single afternoon. Walter arrived at 11:49. He came through the side entrance with his briefcase. in a manner that suggested he had been doing this kind of work long enough that nothing surprised him anymore. Frank ended his call. The three of us stood in the narrow hallway outside Patricia's office like men waiting for a verdict we had already written ourselves. Trust is frozen as of 10:02 this morning, Walter said. Administrative hold filed with the account. Raymond Colt has no standing, no access, and no legal pathway. If he presents that document tonight, it goes nowhere. He doesn't know that yet, Frank said. No, Walter agreed. He doesn't. That was the part that required the most discipline, letting a man walk into a room, believing he held something that had already been taken from him. Every instinct I had developed over 28 years in the military said to move, to intercept, to cut the problem off before it reached the room. But Frank had been clear since Thursday the record does more damage than the confrontation. Let the paper speak. Let the moment arrive on its own terms. Patricia found us at 12:05 with a sealed folder. Written statement, she said, handing it to Frank. Timestamp submission from Sandra Harmon, Thursday 9:42 p.m. My name, my signature, notarized by our on-site administrative notary this morning. She paused. I also flagged something in the vendor payments file. Frank opened the folder. I looked over his shoulder. Beneath Patricia's statement was a printed payment record, a secondary vendor invoice submitted 2 weeks before the wedding. The payee line read, T. Reeves Audio and Event Services. The amount was the contracted MC fee plus an additional line item, supplemental coordination fee $800. The notation beside it read, Per R. Colt Personal Authorization. Tommy Reeves, I said. He's setting up in the main hall, Patricia said. I haven't spoken to him about this. I looked at Frank. He looked at the payment record. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who had just watched a door open that he had been expecting to open for 2 days. I'll talk to him, I said. Tommy Reeves was younger than I expected, mid-30s, sandy hair, the easy confidence of someone who had hosted enough events to stop being nervous about rooms full of people. He was adjusting a microphone stand near the small elevated stage at the far end of the reception hall when I walked in. The hall smelled of cut flowers and candle wax. Round tables were dressed in ivory linen. Table 9 sat in the far left corner, partially screened by a decorative column exactly where it had been on Friday. Mr. Harmon. He recognized me from the rehearsal dinner. He extended a hand. Big day. It is, I said. I wanted to ask you about the setup. He walked me through the standard arrangement. 2 roaming mics, 1 fixed podium, mic, 1 handheld for toasts. Then I asked about the camera positioning. He explained the fixed camera near the stage, the handheld videographer, and then stopped. Something in his expression shifted. Not guilt exactly, but the look of a man who has just remembered a detail he had been trying not to think about. The supplemental coordination, I said. The $800. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, How do you know about that? It's in the vendor file, under Raymond Colt's authorization. He set the microphone stand down carefully. Look, it was framed as a cinematography request. He said he wanted a locked reaction shot from the corner table during the toast and the dance. Said it was for a personal project, a keepsake video, and the microphone, another pause, longer this time. He said if anyone at that table became disruptive, I should bring a roaming mic over immediately, get the audio. He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd walked in. He described the person at that table. Older man, military type. Said he might get emotional. I let that sit in the air between us. Mr. Reeves. I said that footage was intended to be used as evidence of diminished mental capacity in a legal document. The camera angle, the microphone, the reaction shot, it was a trap, not a keepsake. I watched him process it. The easy confidence drained out of his posture, the way heat leaves a room when a window opens in October. I didn't know, he said. His voice had dropped half a register. I thought it was, I don't know what I thought. I believe you, I said, and I did. Tommy Reeves was not a conspirator. He was a detail used, cleanly paid, quietly expected to perform without asking questions. Raymond was good at that. Frank Mercer is outside, I said. He's going to ask you to sign an affidavit about the payment and the instruction, what you were told when you were told it, and by whom. Are you willing to do that? He didn't hesitate. Yes. I left him by the microphone stand and walked back toward the hallway. The main hall was empty except for the catering staff moving between tables. The Edison bulbs above the ceremony aisle were lit now, even in the midday light, casting a warmth that the occasion did not yet deserve. I checked my watch. 1 hour and 14 minutes. Everything Raymond and Sandra had built over 6 years. The paperwork, the camera angle, the planted idea in my daughter's head was sitting in a folder in Frank's hands, countered line by line before the first guest had arrived. But I still had to sit at table 9, and I still had to watch my daughter dance with another man. And somewhere between those two things, I had a decision to make about what the rest of this day was actually going to cost. Task 11. The ceremony started at 2 o'clock, the way ceremonies do, with music that costs more than it should, and people dressed in clothes they will never wear again. I sat in the third row on the groom's side, which was the only seat Sandra had not arranged, because Daniel had asked Patricia to hold it for me that morning without telling anyone else. Claire walked down the aisle alone. That had been her decision made the week before, quietly and without announcement. I learned it from Beverly, who had texted me at noon. She told Sandra she didn't want either of them walking her, said she wanted to do it herself. I did not know when Claire had made that choice or what had prompted it, but she walked the length of that barn in an ivory dress, with her chin level and her eyes on Daniel, and she looked like a woman who had decided something important and was not going to explain it to anyone. I watched her and kept my hands flat on my knees. Daniel saw me when he took his place at the altar. He gave no signal, no nod, no look, just a half-second of eye contact that said everything a conversation would have taken 10 minutes to say. Then he turned to face his bride, and the room exhaled. The ceremony took 41 minutes. I counted them. The reception opened with cocktail hour, then dinner, then toasts. Raymond's toast ran 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I counted those too. He talked about family and commitment, and the privilege of watching Claire become the woman she was. He used the word father twice without looking at me. The room applauded. Sandra touched a napkin to the corner of her eye. I sat at table 9 and drank water. Frank was at a table near the bar, 3 rows to my right, with Walter beside him. Neither of them looked at me. That was the arrangement, separate. Quiet, unremarkable. 3 men in a room full of people who did not know they were there for a reason. Tommy Reeves handled the microphone with the careful neutrality of a man who had signed something that morning and was now being very precise about his job. The roaming camera stayed near the stage. The fixed camera did not move toward table 9. Whatever Raymond had paid for, he was not getting it. I noticed the moment Raymond realized it. It was between the entree and the dessert course when Tommy made the transition announcement for the father-daughter dance. Raymond stood from his seat at the head table and adjusted his jacket. He glanced toward the table 9, a quick, practiced scan, the kind of look a man makes when he is checking whether something is in position. He found me sitting with my hands on the table and an untouched glass of water in front of me. No expression on my face, no tension in my shoulders. He looked for half a second longer than he intended to. Then the music started. It was a slow song, something with piano and strings, the kind of arrangement that fills a room without occupying it. Claire stepped onto the dance floor, and Raymond took her hand, and they began to move in the careful, practiced rhythm of 2 people who had rehearsed this. Claire's dress caught the light from the Edison bulbs overhead. She was smiling a real smile, not a performed one, the kind that lives in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. I had not seen that smile since she was 9 years old, and we were building a birdhouse in the garage on a Saturday morning, and she had held up a piece of cedar plank and said, "Dad, I think this one's the right size." I had told her she was correct. She had smiled exactly like that. I looked at the table. The wood grain ran in a long diagonal line across the surface. I traced it with one finger and did not look up until the first chorus had passed. When I raised my eyes again, Raymond was watching me from the dance floor. Not obviously, he was still moving, still holding Claire's hand, still performing the role he had written for himself. But his gaze had settled on table 9 with the particular attention of a man whose plan depends on a specific reaction and has just begun to understand he is not going to get one. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked at my daughter. That was when Patricia appeared at my left shoulder. She leaned down the way a venue manager does when she needs to say something without drawing attention. Close, quiet head, slightly angled. "Someone is in the bridal suite," she said. "One of the catering staff found him. He's not catering." "Does Frank know?" "I texted him 40 seconds ago." I looked at the dance floor. The song was at its bridge, another 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Raymond was still watching me from the corner of his eye. Claire was still smiling. The room was still full of people whose attention was exactly where Raymond had designed it to be. I pushed back my chair and stood. Nobody saw me leave. The Edison bulbs held the room in their amber radius, and every face in that barn was turned toward the dance floor, toward the ivory dress, and the slow piano, and the man who had spent 6 years positioning himself at the center of my daughter's life. I walked out the side door with Patricia 2 steps ahead of me and the sound of the music fading behind me, like something I had already decided to let go. The hallway was empty and lit by a single overhead fixture. Patricia's heels were quiet on the hardwood. My shoes made no sound at all. At the end of the corridor, the bridal suite door was ajar. A line of light ran along the floor beneath it. From inside came the sound of a drawer being opened. I looked at Patricia. She looked at me. "He doesn't know Walter's already filed," I said. "No," she said. "He doesn't." I put my hand flat on the door. The door swung open on a room that smelled of hairspray and cut flowers. It was a well-appointed space. 2 upholstered chairs, a long vanity mirror, framed in warm bulbs, a standing rack where Claire's second outfit hung in a garment bag. A round table had been set up near the window, the kind of folding table that venues use for overflow catering. On it sat a leather portfolio case unzipped with a stack of papers inside. A man I did not recognize stood behind the table with his hand on the portfolio. He was young, late 20s, collared shirt, the look of someone who had been told to dress professionally, and had done exactly that and nothing more. He stared at me the way people stare when they are holding something they should not be holding and have just run out of time to explain why. "Who are you?" I said. He straightened. "Connor Hale. I'm coordinating logistics for Raymond Colt." A pause. "For the family." I stepped into the room. Patricia came in behind me and moved to the left, positioning herself between Connor and the door. Neither of us had raised our voices. That was the thing about a room like this. The furniture absorbed sound, and a quiet conversation in a bridal suite carried the weight of something far louder. "That portfolio," I said. "Open it." Connor looked at Patricia. She gave him nothing. He looked back at me and made the decision that people in his position usually make when they realize the person across from them already knows the answer to every question they are about to ask. He opened it. The co-management authorization document was on top, 4 pages, clean margins. My name in the signature block. The reproduced signature, faint and slightly misaligned, exactly as Walter had described it at the Marriott that morning. I did not touch it. Frank arrived 90 seconds later. He came through the door with Walter behind him, both of them moving with the unhurried certainty of men who had been expecting this room since 10 o'clock that morning. Frank set his own folder on the vanity counter and looked at the document in the portfolio without picking it up. "Connor Hale," Frank said. He was not asking. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Mr. Harmon's attorney." He turned to Patricia. "Can you note the time?" Patricia checked her watch. 4:37 p.m. Frank nodded. He reached into his folder and removed a single document, Walter's administrative hold notice filed at 10:02 that morning with the trust account. He set it beside the portfolio without comment. Walter looked at Connor. "The Harmon Family Trust has been under administrative freeze since 10:02 a.m. today. Any document purporting to modify, expand, or transfer authority over trust assets, regardless of signatures present, is legally void as of that timestamp." He said it the way a man says something he has said before in other rooms, with precision and without performance. That portfolio and everything in it carries no legal weight. It did not carry legal weight when it was printed. It will not carry legal weight if it is signed. Connor said nothing. He took his hand off the portfolio. Raymond appeared in the doorway at 4:41. He had come from the reception hall. His jacket was still on his pocket, square still folded. He took in the room in one scan, Connor standing back from the table, Frank beside the vanity, Walter near the window, Patricia by the door, and me in the center of it all, with my hands in my pockets, and nothing on my face that he could use. He did not speak immediately. That surprised me. I had expected something, a protest, a redirect, the smooth reframing that came so naturally to a man who had built 6 years on narrative management. Instead, he stood in the doorway and looked at the administrative hold notice on the vanity counter. Then he looked at me. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since Wednesday." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted. Raymond's gaze moved from me to the folder in Frank's hand, then to Walter, then back to the document on the table. I watched him calculate, not whether to fight that decision had already been made for him, but how to position the next moment. "This was her idea," he said. "From the beginning. The document, the authorization, all of it. Sandra came to me. I want that on record." Frank wrote something on his legal pad. He did not look up. Noted, "I mean it." Raymond's voice had an edge now. Not anger, something closer to fear, dressed in the clothing of indignation. "I was the one who pushed back. She had the original document. She kept Jerry's signature from 2019. I didn't—" "Mr. Colt." Frank looked up from his pad. "Anything you say in this room will be documented. I'd recommend you consult your own attorney before continuing." Raymond stopped. Connor picked up his jacket from the chair and folded it over his arm. He looked at no one in particular. "I'm gonna go," he said. Patricia stepped aside and let him pass. His footsteps moved quickly down the hallway, then disappeared. Raymond stayed in the doorway. He looked older than he had at the rehearsal dinner, not physically, but in the way a man ages, in the space between believing he controls something and understanding he never did. "What happens now?" he said. I looked at him for a long moment. 28 years in the military teaches you that the most dangerous thing you can do after winning a position is to believe you have won the war. This was not the end. It was a single room, a single afternoon, a document that was now legally worthless. Now I said, "You go back to the reception, you finish the evening, and Monday morning you call a lawyer." I walked to the door. He moved aside. Behind me, Frank was still writing. Frank found me in the hallway at 5:03. He was carrying 2 folders, now his own, which had been with him since the Marriott, and a second one thicker, the edges slightly uneven from the documents that had been added to it throughout the day. He held the second one out to me without preamble. "That's yours?" he said. Every page time-stamped, sourced, and signed where a signature was needed. 8 independent items. Walter's freeze notice is on top. Raymond's verbal statement is at the back. I had Patricia initial it as a witness. I took the folder. It was heavier than I expected. "Patricia initialed a verbal statement," I said. "She was present. She heard it. Under Virginia evidentiary standards, a witnessed verbal admission documented contemporaneously by a third party carries weight, particularly when it corroborates existing physical evidence." Frank adjusted his own folder under his arm. Raymond said Sandra came to him, that she held the original 2019 document. That shifts the primary nexus of the fraud toward her. He was protecting himself. He was, but the statement is still accurate, and it's still documented. Frank looked down the hallway toward the reception hall. The sound of music drifted through something upbeat, now the kind of song that plays when a reception is trying to recover its momentum. "Walter left 10 minutes ago. He'll file the full trustee report with the account institution Monday morning. After that, any attempt by anyone to access or modify the Harmon Family Trust triggers an automatic flag to his office." I opened the folder. The pages were in order. Walter's administrative hold at the front, then Patricia's notarized statement, the vendor payment record with Raymond's name on the supplemental line, Tommy's affidavit, Daniel's screenshot printed and dated, Beverly's handwritten statement from the coffee shop, 7 pages of my own notebook, entries photocopied and time-stamped, and at the back, a single typed page with Patricia's initials at the bottom, R. Colt stated verbally in the presence of the undersigned that the co-management authorization document was conceived and initiated by S. Harmon. Statement made at 4:41 p.m., October 11th, 2025. Whitmore Barn, Fairfax County, Virginia. I closed the folder. "What do I do with this tonight?" I said. "Nothing," Frank said. "Tonight you put it in your truck. Monday you bring it to my office and we decide together what goes to the Commonwealth attorney and what stays internal." He paused. "This is not a decision you make at a wedding reception." He was right. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked back toward the hall. The reception had reorganized itself the way receptions do after something has gone slightly wrong. Louder, more deliberate, everyone performing enjoyment with a little more effort than before. The dance floor had filled with guests. The catering staff moved between tables with dessert. The Edison bulbs overhead gave everything the amber warmth of a photograph taken at the right moment. I found my seat at table 9. Beverly was sitting 2 chairs down from mine. She had a glass of white wine in front of her and was watching the dance floor with the expression of a woman who had done something difficult and was still deciding whether she felt good about it. When I sat down, she looked over. "How did it go?" she said. "It went." She nodded. That was enough. Across the room, Raymond had returned to the head table. He was seated beside Sandra, his jacket back on his posture composed. He had not spoken to her, I could tell by the angle of Sandra's body, the way she had shifted 3 inches away from him without appearing to do so. She was watching the dance floor, but her attention was somewhere else entirely. I had seen that look before. It was the look of a person whose plan has returned to them empty-handed, and who is now calculating in real time what that means. Sandra was intelligent. She did not need Raymond to explain what had happened in the bridal suite. She had read it already in the line of his shoulders, the absence of the portfolio, the way he had sat down without meeting her eyes. She looked toward table 9. I was already looking at her. For 3 seconds we held that 2 people across a crowded room with 30 years of history between them and a folder of documentation sitting under my arm. Then Sandra looked away. She picked up her wine glass and set it down without drinking from it, and said something to the woman on her left that had nothing to do with anything. That was all. Claire found me at 5:41. I knew she was coming before she arrived. I saw her cross the dance floor, step around a group of guests near the bar, and move toward the far corner of the room with the focused trajectory of someone who has made a decision and is not going to change it before they arrive. She was still in her wedding dress. Her hair had come down slightly on one side. She looked like a woman who had been married for 4 hours and had just noticed something she should have seen a week ago. She stopped at the edge of table 9. She looked at the folder under my arm. She looked at my face. Then she said, "Dad, are you okay?" 3 words. One of them my name, not Gerald. Not the formal address she had used at the rehearsal dinner when Raymond was standing close enough to hear. The one she had used when she was 9 years old, and we were in the garage on a Saturday morning, and she needed an answer she could trust. I looked at my daughter in her wedding dress in the amber light of a barn in Fairfax County, and I said, "I'm fine, Claire. Tonight, I'm fine." She studied me for a moment. She was not satisfied with the answer, but she accepted it, the way intelligent people accept partial truth, provisionally with a silent note to return to the subject later. "We should talk," she said. "Not tonight." "No," I agreed, "not tonight." She put her hand on my arm for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went back to her husband. I sat at table 9 with a folder full of evidence, and my daughter's handprint still warm on my sleeve, and I thought about the particular weight of a word that costs nothing to say and everything to mean. Outside, the October dark had come down over Fairfax County. Somewhere in the parking lot, Raymond Colt's car was sitting beside Sandra's, and neither of them knew yet what Monday morning was going to look like. But I did, and for the first time since Wednesday I opened my notebook to a clean page. She arrived at 10:04 on a Sunday morning, which told me she had been awake for a while before she decided to come. I had heard the car in the driveway, a rental, not Daniel's truck, which meant she had driven herself. I was at the kitchen counter when she knocked, which was something she had not done since she was 17 and had stayed out past midnight, and was not sure what reception was waiting on the other side of the door. I opened it before the second knock landed. She was still in yesterday's eye makeup, faint shadows beneath both eyes, her hair pulled back in the kind of knot a person ties when they have something more important to think about than their hair. She was wearing Daniel's flannel shirt over her own jeans. She was carrying a small white envelope. "I made coffee," I said. "Good," she said, and came inside. She sat at the kitchen table, the same chair she had used every morning from age 6 to age 18, the one angled slightly toward the window, the one that caught the morning light at the right angle in October. I poured 2 cups and set them on the table and sat across from her and waited. She put the envelope between us. "Mom left this at the hotel last night," she said. "Slid it under the door. Daniel found it at 2 a.m. when he got up for water." I looked at the envelope. My name was not on it. It was addressed to Claire in Sandra's careful, slightly forward-leaning handwriting. "Did you read it?" I said. 3 times. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "She says you've been struggling since retirement, that you've had difficulty managing finances, That Raymond was trying to protect me from decisions you might make that weren't in my best interest. She paused. She says the paperwork in the bridal suite was a precautionary measure, a loving precaution. I said nothing. She used the phrase, "Your father means well," 4 times, Claire said. 4 times in 2 pages. I counted. She looked up at me. That's the phrase she uses when she's already decided someone is wrong and wants me to feel like I reached that conclusion on my own. The morning light came through the window at a low October angle and fell across the table between us. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The coffee was dark and strong, and neither of us was drinking it. "I need you to tell me what happened," Claire said. "From the beginning, not the version that protects me, the actual version." So I told her. Not everything. Not the specific figures. Not Walter's legal language. Not the Virginia code sections Frank had referenced in the Marriott meeting room. Those were for Monday. But I told her about the call on Wednesday, about Table 9, about the email Beverly had shown me at 7 in the morning, about the camera angle Tommy had been paid to hold, about the folder sitting in my truck with 8 sources and a time-stamped freeze notice at the front. I told her about the 2019 loan, the $40,000, her mother's name on the promissory note, the signature that had been scanned and reproduced and placed on a document designed to hand Raymond Colt partial control of a trust I had spent 20 years building for her. I told her about Daniel's call in February, the text message Raymond had sent. The consent clause is the only problem. Once we handle Jerry, the rest is straightforward. Claire listened, the way she had always listened to things that mattered, completely still. No interruptions, her eyes on the table or the window or the middle distance, processing the way someone processes information they had already half suspected and had been hoping to be wrong about. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long has she been doing this?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "Long enough that the pieces fit together without gaps." "The dance," she said. It was not a question. She brought it up in January. She said it would mean so much to Raymond, that he'd earned it. She stopped. I thought it was my idea by March. "I know. I walked down the aisle alone." She said it quietly, as if she were telling herself something rather than me. I decided that 4 days before the wedding. I don't know why exactly. It just felt necessary. I thought about telling her that it had been the right instinct, that some part of her had known, even without the evidence that something had been arranged that she had not actually agreed to. But that was not the kind of thing a father says to a daughter who is still working out what she knows and what she was told. So I said that took courage. She looked at me then directly the way she had when she was small and wanted to know if something was true. "Are you pressing charges?" That's Frank's question for Monday. "But you have enough." "Yes." She nodded once. She picked up her coffee and drank from it for the first time. Set it down. Straightened the envelope on the table so it was parallel to the edge, the way she had always straightened things when she was thinking. Then she said, "I want to be there. Monday. Whatever happens with the Commonwealth attorney, I want to be part of that decision." That was the sentence I had not expected. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have seen it." Not the apology that would have been easier for both of us and would have meant considerably less. Instead, she had asked to stand in the room where the decision was made. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast for 12 years, and I understood that whatever had been planted in her over the past months had not taken root as deep as Sandra had believed. "I'll tell Frank," I said. She finished her coffee. She stood, picked up the envelope, and folded it once and put it in her pocket. At the door she paused, with her hand on the frame. The same door, the same frame, the same October light, and said, "The greenhouse, in the backyard. Is it still there?" "Still there," I said. She nodded as if that settled something. Then she walked to her car and drove away, and I stood at the kitchen door, watching the rental disappear around the corner, with the particular feeling of a man who has been handed something back that he did not realize had been taken. Claire had been gone for 2 hours when Sandra pulled into my driveway. I saw the car from the kitchen window, her silver sedan, the one she had driven for 6 years, the one with the small dent above the rear left wheel that she had never bothered to fix because Raymond kept saying he would handle it. She sat in the car for 4 minutes before she got out. I know because I counted the way I count things now, the way a man counts, when the numbers are the only neutral thing left in a situation. I opened the door before she reached the porch. She looked the way people look after a night without sleep that they will not admit, to compose on the surface the effort of that composition, visible only in the slight tightness around the eyes, and the way her hands were not quite still at her sides. She was wearing the same coat she had worn to the rehearsal dinner. She had not dressed for this visit. She had simply come. "I'd like to talk," she said. "Come in," I said. I did not offer coffee. I set my notebook on the kitchen table and sat across from her, and I waited. The October light came through the window at the same low angle it had that morning with Claire. The house was quiet. Outside, the neighbor's dog had stopped barking. Sandra sat. She placed her handbag on the table beside her and folded her hands on top of it, and looked at me with the expression of a woman who has prepared a version of events, and is deciding how much of it she actually believes. "I want you to understand," she began, "that everything I did was for Claire." I said nothing. "Raymond and I were concerned. You've been alone since retirement. You're 70 years old, Jerry. The trust is substantial, and you are the only person who controls it. And we thought that having someone else involved would protect Claire if something happened to you." I wrote the time in my notebook, 2:14 p.m. Then I wrote S arrived, said everything I did was for Claire. Sandra watched me write. Something shifted in her expression, not alarm, yet just attention. She continued, "The document was not meant to take anything from you. It was a management agreement, a practical arrangement. Raymond has business experience. He understands asset management in a way that I don't," I said. "I didn't say that. You implied it. Wednesday through Saturday, consistently." I wrote that down too. Implication of diminished capacity consistent across 6 days. Continue. She looked at the notebook. Are you writing down what I'm saying?" "I'm keeping a record," I said. "The same way I've kept records since Wednesday. You're welcome to see what I write. I'm not hiding it." A pause, longer than the ones that had preceded it. Sandra was intelligent, I had always known, that had married her. In part because of it, had spent 11 years watching her read a room, the way a contractor reads a blueprint, identifying load-bearing walls from the doorway. She read this one now and understood what she was standing inside. She continued anyway. That surprised me slightly. But people who have operated from a position of narrative control for long enough sometimes cannot stop, even when they understand the room has changed. The habit is too deep. "I kept the 2019 document," she said, "because I thought there might come a time when we needed to demonstrate that you had made significant financial decisions with family implications. That's all it was. A precaution. I wrote, retain 2019 loan agreement with intent to use as leverage, described as precaution. I spoke with Raymond about the trust before the wedding, yes. We talked about it for months. I thought if we approached you directly, you would—" "Refuse," I said. She stopped. "You thought I would refuse," I said. "So you didn't ask." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator made a low sound and then went silent. "Raymond said things in that room," Sandra said. Her voice had changed flatter now, the rehearsed portion of the visit running out. "He said things I didn't ask him to say. He said you came to him," I said, "that it was your idea from the beginning, that you held the original document." I did not say it with anger. I said it the way a man reads a sentence from a page. "Frank Mercer documented it at 4:41 p.m. Saturday. Patricia Hale initialed it as a witness." Sandra was very still. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," I said. "I'm telling you because you came here to establish a version of events, and I think it's important that you understand what version already exists and where it's already filed." She looked at her hands. The composure was still there, but it had become something different. Not a performance now, but a necessity. The way a person holds their posture when the alternative is to come apart in a room they drove themselves to. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Monday morning I meet with Frank. Claire will be present. We'll decide together what goes to the Commonwealth attorney." "Claire." Something moved across Sandra's face that I did not try to name. "She came here this morning." "She did? What did she say?" "That's between Claire and me." Sandra picked up her handbag from the table. She stood with the careful movement of a person making sure their legs will hold. She looked around the kitchen at the counter, the window, the table where she had eaten breakfast for 11 years. And then she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in a very long time. It was not guilt exactly. It was the specific look of a person who has just understood the precise distance between what they told themselves they were doing and what they were actually doing, and found that distance to be larger than they had believed. She did not apologize. She walked to the door and opened it and stepped onto the porch, and I heard her car start in the driveway at 2:41 p.m. I wrote that down too. Then I called Frank. He answered on the second ring. I told him Sandra had come. I told him what she had said in the order she had said it. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said, "Read me the notebook entries." So I did, and while I read, I heard him writing on the other end. In 30 years of friendship, it was the first time I had understood that the most important conversations we had ever had were the ones where only one of us was speaking, and the other was making sure every word landed somewhere permanent. The house was quiet by 7 o'clock. I had eaten something around 6. I could not have told you what exactly the kind of meal that exists only as fuel, and was sitting in the chair by the front window with my notebook open on the side table and the folder Frank had given me at the wedding sitting on the counter where I could see it from across the room. Not because I needed to look at it, because there is a particular kind of discipline in keeping the important things visible rather than put away. The phone rang at 7:12. I looked at the screen. Sandra. I let it ring twice before I answered, not because I was hesitating, because a man who answers on the first ring in a situation like this signals something about himself that I was not prepared to signal. Gerald, she said. She had not called me Gerald in 11 years. She had switched to Jerry sometime in the 3rd year of our marriage, the way people do when formality gives way to something more worn in. The return to the full name told me she had been coached, or had coached herself, into a register that was more careful than the one she had used that afternoon. Sandra, I said, a breath on the line. Then, I spoke with an attorney this afternoon. I assumed you would. He told me... She stopped, started again. He told me what the documentation you have represents, in terms of exposure. Another pause. He used the word significant. I did not respond. I picked up my pen and wrote the time at the top of a fresh page. 7:12 p.m. Then I wrote S. Called. Has spoken with attorney. Used word significant. Yeah, I want to make a proposal, Sandra said. I want to be clear that I'm making it voluntarily after legal counsel and that I understand you may decline. Go ahead. I'm prepared to provide a full written statement. Everything my role in initiating the co-management plan, the timeline of my conversations with Raymond, how I obtained and retained the 2019 document, and the specific instructions I gave regarding the venue and the camera arrangement. A pause. More detailed than anything Raymond said in that room Saturday. Signed, notarized, submitted to whoever Frank Mercer designates. In exchange for what I said, in exchange for your consideration that this not go to the Commonwealth attorney. I wrote that down word for word, offering full written statement, in exchange for consideration, re-Commonwealth attorney referral. Sandra. I said that decision is not mine to make alone. Claire asked to be present for it. I told her she would be. Silence on the line, longer than the others. You told her, Sandra said, not a question. She came this morning. She asked for the truth. I gave it to her. Another silence. When Sandra spoke again, something had shifted in her voice, not the careful register she had opened, with not the practiced neutrality of a person reciting what their attorney suggested. Something underneath that. She walked down the aisle alone, Sandra said. She did. I didn't know she was going to do that until she was already walking. A pause. I watched her from the front row, and I hadn't expected it. Another pause, shorter. She looked like herself, the way she used to look when she'd made up her mind about something and wasn't going to be argued out of it. I said nothing. That's you, Sandra said. That part of her is you. I wrote it down, not as evidence, as something else entirely. Beverly told me in March, Sandra said then. She called me. This was March 14th, I remember, because it was a Saturday and Raymond was out, and she said that what I was planning was going to end in a way I hadn't imagined, that I was underestimating you, that I had always underestimated you. A short sound that was not quite a laugh. I told her she was being dramatic. She wasn't, I said. No, she wasn't. A breath. I want you to know that I am aware of the difference between what I told myself I was doing and what I was actually doing. I became aware of it sometime between 2 and 5 this afternoon, and it is not a comfortable awareness. I believe you, I said. I don't expect that to change anything. It doesn't, I said, but I believe you. The line was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the front window and then gone. Tell Frank, Sandra said, that my offer stands. Full statement, whatever format he needs, whatever timeline works. No conditions beyond what I've said. A pause. And tell Claire. She stopped. Tell her what I said. A long silence, the kind that has weight. Tell her that the greenhouse thing, the question she asked you, the answer she's looking for isn't in the building. Another pause. It's in the fact that she still remembered to ask. She ended the call at 7:31. I sat with the phone in my hand and the notebook open on the table and the quiet of the house settling back around me like something that had briefly lifted and returned. 19 minutes. That was how long it had taken Sandra, after 11 years of marriage and 30 years of knowing each other, to say the only thing in 2 days that I had not already anticipated. I wrote down what she had said about the greenhouse. Verbatim, the way Frank had taught me, not paraphrased, not interpreted exactly as spoken. Then I wrote one more line beneath it. Not for Frank, not for the Commonwealth attorney, not for the folder sitting on the counter. For myself. Because some things that happen inside a week are not about the law, or the trust, or the document sitting in a bridal suite at a barn in Fairfax County. Some things are about what is left when all of that is finished. I closed the notebook and turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, thinking about a greenhouse and a daughter who still knew to ask about it. Monday was 12 hours away. Raymond Colt did not yet know what 12 hours looked like from this side of them. Frank's office was on the third floor of a building on Chainbridge Road that had been there since the late 80s and looked at dark wood, paneling frame bar association certificates, the particular smell of carpet that has absorbed 20 years of serious conversations. I had been in this office 8 times in my life, twice for my own estate planning, once when Sandra and I divorced. The other 5 times were for other people's problems that had eventually become adjacent to mine. This was the 9th time. I arrived at 8:52. Claire was already there. She was sitting in one of the 2 chairs across from Frank's desk, her coat folded over her lap, a cup of coffee from the building's ground floor cafe going warm in her hand. She was wearing her own clothes today, not Daniel's flannel, not the wedding dress, just dark slacks and a gray sweater, the kind of outfit a person chooses when they want to be taken seriously in a room. She looked up when I came in and gave me the short nod of someone who has been preparing for a thing and is ready for it to begin. Frank's on a call, she said. Walter, he'll be off in a minute. I sat in the chair beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Through the wall, I could hear Frank's voice low, measured the tone he used when he was confirming rather than negotiating. Did you sleep? I said. She said. Did you? I said. That was the entirety of what we needed to say about the night before. Frank came in at 9:03, set his legal pad on the desk, and sat down. He looked at both of us once, the assessment of a man who has spent 30 years reading rooms, and then opened the folder. Walter filed the trustee report at 8:15 this morning, he said. The Harmon Family Trust remains under administrative freeze. No distributions, no modifications, no access by any party other than Walter in his capacity as trustee until the hold is formally lifted. That requires either Jerry's written revocation of the hold request or a Virginia court order. Claire wrote something in a small notebook she had brought. I noticed she had brought a notebook. I did not comment on it. The documentation package, Frank continued, now contains 9 independent items. He laid them out one by one across the desk as he named them Walter's administrative hold notice. Patricia's notarized statement, the vendor payment record with Raymond's supplemental line, Tommy's affidavit, Daniel's screenshot printed and dated, Beverly's handwritten statement, 7 photocopied notebook pages from the week Patricia's initialed record of Raymond's verbal admission, and the final page a typed summary of Sunday's notebook. Entries from Sandra's visit, time-stamped and signed by Jerry. 9 sources, Claire said. She was not reading from her notebook. She was looking at the pages on the desk. 9 independent sources, Frank said, each corroborating the others at multiple points. The core allegation is criminal forgery under Virginia Code, Section 18.2-172, the reproduction of Jerry's signature on a legal document without his consent with intent to defraud. Secondary allegations include conspiracy to commit fraud under Section 18.2-499, an unauthorized solicitation of a legal transaction at a venue in violation of a binding contractual rider. And Raymond's statement in the bridal suite, Claire said, that he was acting on Sandra's instructions. Also documented, Frank said, which is why we need to discuss Sandra separately. He looked at me. I looked at Claire. She set her coffee on the edge of the desk and straightened slightly in the chair. She offered a full written statement. I said, Sunday evening, 7:12 p.m., voluntarily after legal counsel. No conditions except consideration that the matter not go to the Commonwealth attorney. I know, Frank said. I'd like Claire's position on that. Claire was quiet for a moment. She looked at the 9 documents arranged across the desk. Then she said, accept the statement. Submit everything to the Commonwealth attorney anyway. Her cooperation gets noted in the record. It doesn't stop the process. Frank wrote that down. That's my recommendation as well. Raymond called your office this morning, I said. 8:47 a.m., Frank said. I did not respond. I have no obligation to. I don't represent him, and any communication from him at this point goes through his own counsel. He paused. It tells us he understands his exposure. A man who doesn't understand his exposure doesn't call the other side's attorney at 8:47 on a Monday morning. The phone on Frank's desk buzzed. He picked it up, listened for 4 seconds, said, put him through, and pressed a button. Walter, he said, switching to speaker. Walter's voice came through the line with the slight flatness of a speakerphone in a quiet office. Mornin'. Claire, good to have you involved in this. Thank you, Walter, Claire said. The account institution has flagged the trust for enhanced monitoring, Walter said. Any inquiry, any attempt to access account information, any contact from a third party claiming authority over the trust, all of it goes to my office first. I've also put Raymond Colt's name on the flag list along with Sandra Harmon and Connor Hale. Good, Frank said. One more thing, Walter said. The promissory note from 2023. The $22,000 routed through a third party. I've been looking at the mechanics of that transaction. There may be an additional exposure there related to how the funds were characterized for tax purposes. I'll have more by Wednesday. Frank wrote something and circled it twice. Claire looked at me. I gave her a small nod that meant, this is not new, this is just another layer, and we will handle it, the way we have handled everything else this week, one document at a time. Walter signed off at 9:31. Frank spent the next 40 minutes walking Claire through each document in the folder, explaining what it established, what it corroborated, and what it could not prove on its own. Claire asked 7 questions. All 7 were precise, relevant, and the kind of question a person asks when they are not looking for reassurance, but for accuracy. At 10:42, Frank picked up his pen. I'll contact the Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney's Office this afternoon. Formal referral, full documentation package Sandra's offer, noted as a mitigating factor for their consideration. From that point, prosecutorial discretion governs what happens next. How long? Claire asked. Weeks to months, Frank said. These things move at their own pace, but the record is clean and the sources are independent. That matters. Claire nodded. She closed her notebook. We left Frank's office at 11:07 and took the elevator down together without speaking. In the lobby, Claire stopped by the door and looked out at the parking lot where October had turned the trees, along Chainbridge Road, into the particular shade of amber that only lasts about a week before it goes brown. I want to see the greenhouse, she said. Not today, but soon. It needs some work, I said. The east panel has a crack. I know how to fix cracks, she said. She pushed the door open and walked to her car, and I stood in the lobby of Frank's building watching my daughter cross a parking lot in October light, and thought about the particular arithmetic of a week, how 7 days can contain within them something that took 6 years to build and 1 morning to begin to dismantle. I walked to my truck. The folder was on the passenger seat where I had left it. I did not open it. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot and drove home through the amber trees, and for the first time since the phone had rung on Wednesday evening with Claire's voice. On the other end, I drove without counting anything at all. 8 days after the phone rang on a Wednesday evening with Claire's voice. On the other end, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, and the morning coming through the window at the low October angle that meant the season had shifted further overnight than it had the day before. It was Sunday, the 19th of October. I had made coffee at 6:30, the way I always do, and had been sitting with the notebook since 7. Not writing, reading, going back through the entries the way a man goes back through a building he has just finished constructing, not to check the work, because the work is done, but to understand what the building actually is now that it is standing. The first entry was dated October 8th, 2025. Raymond Colt. 2 words, nothing else. I remembered writing them at the kitchen table with the MP badge drying on the cloth beside me and the sound of Claire's voice still in the room, the way sound lingers after a call ends, occupying the air for a few seconds before it belongs to the past. I turned the pages slowly. The entries ran in order. Table 9, the venue, visit the diner on Route 29, Hargrove's, and the rehearsal dinner. Millie's at 7 in the morning with Beverly's phone face up on the table. The Marriott meeting room. Walter's pen moving across the administrative hold form. Patricia's sealed folder. The vendor payment record with Raymond's name beside an $800 line item that had been intended to catch me in a moment of weakness, and had instead become the third piece of a case that now sat in the Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Frank had submitted the formal referral on Wednesday the 15th. He had called me at 4 in the afternoon to confirm it was filed, and I had thanked him and written that down too. Referral submitted, 4:02 p.m. October 15th, the last entry with a timestamp. After that, the entries changed. They became shorter, less precise. The kind of writing a person does when they are no longer building a record, but simply noting the passage of time and what it contains. October 16th, Claire called, 15 minutes. She sounds like herself. October 17th, Walter confirmed trust remains frozen. No contact from Raymond or Sandra. October 18th, Frank's office called. Routine follow-up. Nothing required from me today. I closed the notebook and finished my coffee and went outside to check on the greenhouse. The east panel crack ran about 14 inches along the lower frame, a clean split, where the glazing bar had expanded and contracted through too many seasons without maintenance. I had been meaning to fix it for 2 years. I had not fixed it for 2 years the way a man does not fix certain things when he is living alone, and the things that need fixing belonged to a time when the house had more people in it. Claire arrived at 11:03 with Daniel. He was taller than I remembered from the wedding, or perhaps it was simply that I was seeing him without a room full of people between us. He had brought a bag from a hardware store. He set it on the porch without being asked, and shook my hand the way he had at the rehearsal dinner firm and brief, but this time he held the eye contact a beat longer. She told me about the panel, he said. It's not complicated, I said. Just overdue. Most things are, he said. Claire was already walking toward the greenhouse. She had on work gloves she had brought from wherever she and Daniel were staying. Thick canvas ones, the kind a person owns because they actually use them, not because they intend to. She crouched at the east panel and ran one hand along the crack, the way someone reads a surface before deciding how to address it. Glazing compound, she said, and a new bar on the outside for support. Maybe an hour. I have the compound, I said. I brought the bar, Daniel said. He held up the hardware store bag. The three of us worked on it for the better part of an hour. Claire applied the compound in careful passes while Daniel held the panel, steady, and I handed tools and stayed out of the way, when staying out of the way was the most useful thing I could offer. The October air was cold enough to see breath. The tomato plants I had left in too long were brown at the edges, but still standing the way things stand when they have outlasted their season, but have not yet been told to stop. Claire did not say much while she worked. Neither did Daniel. Neither did I. That was the thing about working beside someone. The silence has a different quality than the silence of two people who have nothing to say. This was the silence of people who were saying something without words, the way a family does, the way people do, who have decided without announcing it that they are going to show up. When it was done, Claire stepped back and looked at the repair. She pressed one gloved hand flat against the panel and held it there for a moment, testing the seal. Good, she said. That was all. They went inside to start lunch around noon. I could hear them in the kitchen, the sound of cabinet doors. Water running, Daniel saying something I could not make out, and Claire laughing at it. A real laugh, the short and unguarded kind that does not happen when a person is performing. I sat on the porch with the notebook in my lap. The yard was quiet. The trees along the back fence had gone the color of the amber bulbs at Whitmore Barn, which I supposed they always did in October, which I supposed I had simply not been paying attention to in previous years. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the corner of the greenhouse and sat there for a moment, very still, then was gone. I opened the notebook to the last blank page. I sat with the pen for a while without writing, not because I did not know what to say, but because I was trying to say it correctly, not as evidence, not as documentation, not as the record of a man who had spent 8 days making sure every word landed somewhere permanent. Just as a man sitting on a porch on a Sunday in October. I wrote 4 sentences. A man who keeps records does not do so because he distrusts people. He does so because he understands that the truth is fragile, and the people who carry it are mortal. This week, I kept records, but what mattered in the end was not the folder. I closed the notebook. Inside, Claire called my name, not Gerald, not Dad, just Jerry, the way she had said it when she was small and needed me to come to the table. I set the notebook on the porch railing and stood. The MP badge was on the shelf inside the front door where it had been since Wednesday. I had not polished it since that evening. I did not need to today. I went inside to have lunch with my daughter. People ask me what I learned from that week. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that silence is not weakness. I learned that a man who keeps records does not need to raise his voice, because the truth properly documented speaks at a volume that no amount of noise can drown out. I learned that the people who show up, not the ones who are supposed to show up, but the ones who actually do, are the family that matters. And I learned in a small greenhouse on a Sunday morning in October that some things can be repaired if you are willing to stand still long enough to do the work. I believe God does not ask us to fight every battle loudly. Sometimes he asks us to be the person in the room who is still standing when the noise stops. Now I will tell you something I rarely say. I waited too long. Too many years of keeping records instead of having conversations. Too many rooms I walked out of when I should have stayed. If there is one thing I would change about how I handled the years before that Wednesday phone call, it is this. Do not wait for the crisis to be the reason you show up for the people you love. Do not be like me. Show up before the folder is necessary. That is my honest opinion. Take it or leave it. If this story stayed with you, if some part of it felt familiar or true or worth passing on, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a thought in the comments. And if you want to be here for the next one, you know what to do. To everyone who stayed until this last sentence, thank you. That means more than I can put in a notebook. One final word. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements, constructed entirely for the purpose of reflection and understanding. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a good place to step away and find something that better suits where you are today. No judgment. The door is always open.